And Lex is vexed. She's going to tell us why protests have stopped being grassroots movements. Start the clock.
Well, you're probably not one of them because you're watching this, but I bet you know one of those social justice warriors. You know, the ones who like to put twibbons on their Twitter profiles. They have those emojis in their handles. If it's not plant-based diets or taking the knee for BLM or getting your knickers in a twist about LGBTQ rights in Qatar, or, you know, talking about whether trans people have penises or don't have penises, you're probably doing the bidding of dark forces that you've got no idea about. You're either working on behalf of big tech, big food, or even worse, actual enemies of the West. Yet I'm talking about foreign influencers who use farms of bots, essentially, to drive and amplify big debates in society in the West to tear us apart. No more is activism, people rising up to push progress in society forward. It's being imposed upon us from the top, and you really have to ask yourself why.
Well, there you go. You've got 5 seconds left. Within 5 seconds. Within a minute. Well, when I'm listening to that, I think, oh, there we go. Countdown is over.
A nice big clock somewhere. I don't have one in my head internally, although I should do as a broadcaster.
When I was listening to you, I was thinking of TikTok. I scroll through TikTok a lot, and it does seem to be that certain messaging is being pushed. And are you arguing that some of those content creators could be bots or...
There is a lot of content being created and certain campaigns that are being heavily forced upon us, which are being essentially curated and choreographed by people who do not have our best intentions at heart. You know, earlier on we started in this programme talking about obesity and the vegan craze. Well, it really helps big food if people get into diets that they can't make at home. So they can continue to manufacture stuff to sell us, even if it's not particularly healthy or good for us. One thing that really bothered me was the LGBTQ outcry in Qatar during the World Cup. But, I mean, we don't seem to have this when the England cricket team go and play in the West Indies, who also outlaw homosexuality. 2/3 of the world do, in fact. So why particularly Qatar? Well, I can tell you why. It's because at that moment in time, when OPEC were putting up oil prices to help Russia fund their war in Ukraine, Qatar was selling us LNG and getting us out of a very, very sticky hole when it came to the energy crisis. And did OPEC want that? No. Who was funding that campaign? It was the UAE and it was Saudi.
I mean, I just think that's practically conspiracy theory
stuff. It's true. Actually, it's true. It's not a conspiracy theory.
Well, it is true. It's not true, because I didn't care about the rights of gay or lesbian or trans people in Qatar because of oil prices. I cared about it because I'm a gay person, and I think that's a moral obligation that businesses that this country celebrates should be like.
You clearly had no idea, actually, that a lot of that campaign was being pushed and funded by the UAE and Saudi, which is the point.
It wasn't a campaign pushed by them. It was a campaign that millions, tens of millions of people in countries that are more progressive felt on an instinctive level. I don't think people watching at home thought that you shouldn't stone gays in Qatar because of the oil prices. They knew that inherently.
OK, so Albie, what do you think about this? Do you think that all of these zeitgeists that are suddenly happening in the 21st century are organic, or do you think there's an argument to say that they're being created?
I would say that I take your point with everything you're saying about what happened in Qatar, but if I can speak about something which maybe I have a little bit more experience with, if I think about BLM, for example. Now, I know some of the people, much as I disagree with them, who arranged some of the BLM organisations in Liverpool, for example. Now, I know the people that organised BLM in Liverpool were not being funded by big tech. They were not being funded by big pharma. They were not being funded by big oil. These were people, black British people, who felt the way that they were being treated was wrong, and they wanted to do something about that. Now, whether or not I agree or disagree with how they did it, that's another thing. But I don't think those people were being influenced by some dark forces.
But do you notice how some campaigns suddenly gain traction and others don't?
But could they not just be gaining traction because they're actually good campaigns?
I mean, Darren, I think you're a really interesting person to ask on this, because you know better than most people what it takes to really push forward a digital campaign when it comes to politics, when it comes to activism, when it comes to getting a message across. And most politicians would die for the sort of coverage that organisations such as BLM got internationally. Do you see how they're quite possibly, or I'd say very definitely, other forces at work deliberately amplifying certain campaigns?
Absolutely. I think TikTok, frankly, will be the ruin of Britain, right? I think there is a real social contagion that goes on thanks to social media. We see that in the gender ideology trend. We see that in actually pushing some of the more I think, outrageous claims that were made by Black Lives Matter, for example, that, you know, capitalism doesn't work for black people, when actually it's what's ensured that a lot of us don't die at childbirth, born working class, black or white. So I think there is a real problem with social media actually pushing these things and these messages. And actually, a lot of people with big pockets do ultimately have a bigger reach because they're able to get these messages out there.
But Alex, I'm really glad you brought Darren in, because of course you two were quite formative in the whole Brexit campaign, and what you will hear a lot of Remainers say is make exactly the same argument that you have made about BLM or about LGBT rights in Qatar, and talk about it with the Brexit argument.
But
so, I mean, what do you say to that? Like, would you argue, is that a reasonable argument for someone who disagrees with you to make?
If the argument is that foreign powers might have a vested interest in trying to coerce outcomes of elections and referendums in other countries, then actually it's backing up exactly what I'm saying.
So if a Remainer said to you, was there foreign coercion and did that lead to Brexit, would you say yes or no?
I think what we know about the way that social media works is that the countries like Russia, countries like Iran, countries like China are really harnessing the power of social media to amplify certain things, and their end goal is to create division. It's not about one particular outcome or the other. You're likely to have those countries amplifying the fascistic, the hard right when it comes to the anti-BLM movement, as much as they're going to be pushing forward the BLM message as well. The point is to try and create division and make us get distracted so we're at civil war and not dealing with the big geopolitical issues of the day.
I'm sorry, I think it's utter madness to compare Russian fascists' goals to those of black people in America and Britain or gay people in Western countries.
I'm talking about geopolitical goals. But I'm not talking about an individual or different action group.
But when these campaigns come about, it's because people are trying to use the power that business has and the companies that many millions of us work for to be better, because they have such sway in society. That is a progressive thing.
Emily, where do you stand on this?
Well, I'm just thinking about this because it's not something I've given too much thought about. But I do, as I said before, I do wonder why some campaigns seem to be pushed by the establishment or by corporates. They seem to all latch on to the same trends, whether it's the climate emergency, whether it's transgender rights, whether it's BLM, whether it's whatnot. But that might just be a preference for woke and sort of corporate social responsibility. But then I do wonder also, are we just pawns? Are we being played by these big tech companies?
What, to be nicer?
Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, they know so much about us. They know what gets us going. They know what we're interested in. They know what enrages us. Right. They know what aggravates us. They know what makes us laugh. That is quite scary. And I think they're more powerful than governments.